Thanks for coming back. I was saying to Prof. Vern that sometimes we underestimate the engagement of young people and academics with an interest in real serious discussions. I had no doubt, of course, that the colleagues will come back and that we will complete the project that we are gathering for. But we have some proposals to make with regard to the programming. So we thought that instead of the breakaway groups, we give some more input on what I think was a brilliant panel, presentation this morning, rich, deep ideas coming through. I was saying to the colleagues, it is almost like a gesture towards what the Critical Mandela Studies program may look like in its curriculum propositions. Okay, so there's some fantastic stuff there. So we'll open time for that and see where that takes us. And then in the second session, we then ask you with regard to any direct inputs into the Embedding Mandela document without breaking into groups, but we do it in a plenary session. You can be as wild and as rogue and as disorganized as you would like to be, as long as we get the insights, as long as we get the contributions. And then what we do, we then shift lunch to 1 o'clock, and then we finish the entire program before lunch. So by the time that we then close the program, it will be around lunchtime, and that will be then the end of the Indaba. So instead of then returning back after lunch, we will have an earlier closure to the program. For various reasons. The one is that I think that the engagements have been of such a nature that we think that we have reached, a long way into the objectives that we have set for ourselves, and just see how the last part works out. Of course, if there are people who would like to continue the debate after lunch, we will also make space and time for that as well. Praveen, you want to add something too?
Yeah, thank you. I've been taking notes furiously through yesterday, and I was trying to take notes this morning. I think there's, for me, so many really valuable lines of inquiry that emerged this morning, which we should be weaving into the Embedding Mandela document. So for me, it would be good to perhaps just start now reflecting on that session, because we didn't have much time, for the three panelists to interact more, but also for you to engage with them. So it would be good to hear, for you, are there questions that you would have wanted to ask, issues that you would have wanted to have addressed? One for me is Fanon's insistence that decolonization is a project of invention. It's inventing something completely new. How do we hold that? And I think that is an idea that is potentially so valuable to us in this moment globally, so valuable to us as an institution. But how do we hold that together with some of the thinking yesterday about indigenous knowledges and engaging with the long histories of this part of the world before European colonization? So going back longer, but also being open to something completely new that might emerge. I would have loved to engage the panelists on that line of inquiry. So I'm wondering, is there anything that is emerging for you from this last session that would be important for us to take note of as we revisit the Embedding Mandela document?
Thank you. You don't mind if I'm sitting down? I get so intimidated, you know. Thank you. I think I'm having an issue that I would want you to respond to. Looking at the objectives of this session since from yesterday and also the theoretical engagements, I got to a point of or conclusion that there is something that is troubling the university, and it's a serious matter. The university is troubled by its present issues and also navigating its future. And I must congratulate, but at the same time, I see a university that is trying to extract itself from all these challenges. Now, the question, I don't know whether it's a question or it's a comment, but we'll see how you address it. That I am always troubled by this dichotomy that we always find ourselves whenever we want to chart a way forward towards the future, new future. Wherever we begin to speak, we proceed from the premise of an oppressor and the oppressed, the colonizer and the colonized. That is the dichotomy I'm referring to. Even the last speakers, the last panel, they actually proceeded from that. And they were trapped, you know, within that dichotomy. And we are all trapped in that kind of a situation. Now, at what point are we talking about what is in between? That I do not know. But I want to believe, here are my notes, but I want to believe that there is something in between the two. The colonizers' experiences and the colonized experiences, the oppressed experiences and the oppressors' experiences. At what point are we talking about the issue that is in between? There is something that is in between. And seemingly we are so skeptical to engage with what is in the middle. And why I'm raising that is because that is the point, right? That is the point where we can begin to think about the new futures. Without at some point, perhaps we have to, for ethical purposes, we have to refer to our past, but to what extent are we going there? Because seemingly, if we are not engaging with that, we will always, you know, be traumatized about what actually happened to us, and that is paralyzing us as a collective. Now, the question would be, is it possible to imagine the future without these icons? Perhaps let's just close down our eyes and pretend as if they never existed. Let's close our eyes as if there was never Mandela, there was never Frantz Fanon, because here we are also talking about individuals who were entrenching a particular agenda, but this is what is important. They never completed it. Even with Nelson Mandela, as much as, you know, we are talking about Nelson Mandela, and I am the advocate of Nelson Mandela. I am also entrenching the agenda of Nelson Mandela, and I'm not apologetic about that. But deep down my heart, I know that he has his own failures. So how do we deal with these things? And that is traumatizing me. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our panelists earlier on. I missed yesterday's session, and I heard what Jenny had summed up, and it seems like we are up for a huge task. And I tend to agree with him. This is traumatizing. It's a challenge, not just for the university, but for the country as well, because David spoke about there's no total freedom. And I'm afraid to stand up and say we shouldn't aspire for total freedom, because when I go back to my class, when I go back to my faculty, I want to see total freedom. And for us, it's also a big challenge because we are bearing the name. So how do we ensure that there is social justice, there is equality, there is equity within the university? How do we do that without now also muddling the names of Mandela and Fanon? Because yes, we need change. That we cannot negate. We need change. How do we go about getting that change? That's what I'm battling with. That's what also is challenging me, and it makes me sad because, and it feels like we are having this discussion way too late when we have the name. I would have liked, Prof. Kate, I would have loved for us to engage on this when we were adopting the Nelson Mandela name at the beginning, because that could have helped us to pave a way on how do we want to see the institution. And the other thing that also worries me is the system that we adopted now under the new Nelson Mandela name when we moved away from the Metropolitan. When we did that, we adopted a system. And it goes back to say also the injustices that we found ourselves in. And the same question that, Joel, who was saying now, what about the economic injustice that we find ourselves in as a country? How do we now navigate that? So there is a reality that we cannot shy away from, but again, there is real work that we need to do to say, accept the reality that we are in and say, how do we do it? And I'm also happy to hear from the executive saying that let's get in trouble using the Mandela name. But my question, especially to Prof. Kit, would be, to what extent can we get in trouble? Because I see a lot of things that are not right in my university. If we have to sit in classrooms where students are hungry, where we get students that are going to faint within sessions or after our lectures, how are we now saying we are bearing the name? How are we now living up to the name of Mandela? How do I find the Mandela in me to help these students? Because we need to aspire them. But the reality is saying something else. So how do we do that moving forward? So it's a huge challenge. And I don't know, I do not have the answers. I don't think you have the answers, but I think also maybe what I'm requesting is that can we then not be in trouble ourselves when we are going to raise these uncomfortable questions? When I'm saying I'm not going to class because my students, not all of them have had a meal. If we do not know how are we going to secure that, then I'm not ready to be in that classroom, because I want everyone who's in there to be able to participate. If I'm going to have half of my class failing because of the politics of their stomach, it's unfair, because when they are failing, the question is going to be, what are you doing as a lecturer? We forgot about now the other socioeconomic issues that they bring into the classroom, and we think that it's a matter of content. So we really need to be critical of the issues that are there and allow us to be free. We have our own ways of transforming the system within our small corners, but when we do that, please let us not get in trouble. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I wasn't planning to speak. Okay. To stand, or can I sit? Okay. I wasn't planning to speak now, but I just, thanks so much. Your point about hunger, I feel there's another example that immediately came to mind, also very specific, but I think it's part of the same thing. The other issue is the questions of these fundings, and I'm thinking specifically with regard to postgraduate students. There's a very unethical practices going on around that in the university. We have students with historic debt, and then when they're accepted into postgrad studies, they're allowed to register, they're given that clearance, they're made to sign documents about how much they will pay back. And often, of course, students are desperate to study, so they will sign, but it's not possible. but the interest is being charged on the historic debt. And then the other unethical thing that's happening is when students get funding for the current year, it's according to the NRF and PGRS funding criteria, that funding is supposed to be for this year only, not for historic debt. What happens, the university is taking that money for the historic debt. And I've been in meetings because I was trying to assist one of my students, and with people from research office and with people from finance. And the research office people say it's not supposed to happen, but they admit that it's happening. And the phrase I heard was that our systems are not aligned. What does that mean? So what happens, the student gets funding for that year. That funding, if there's a large amount of historic debt, the student was allowed to register. That funding then disappears. Now the student has to struggle to try and make up the difference. And it's almost as if it almost feels like there's a cynical thing going on where the university knows if the student succeeds, the university will score because they will get subsidy for the student. And they will still pursue the fees. But if the university fails, then they still pursue the fees. It feels as if people are being exploited with that kind of thing. And it actually makes it very difficult to get to focus on the academic project and try and help the student to finish within the allotted time when you have to spend so much time just trying to help this person, or that person's got to try to find a way to actually live and survive before they can think of their studies.
In fact, I need to just guide the discussion here, because the questions around student hunger and the question about postgraduate support, that's in the system, and those are the debates that needs to be raised, but the formulation that we have here is around the embedding Mandela areas of work. So now, of course, both those two matters one can respond to say that's very un-Mandela-like, and then, of course, try and frame that in a way in which the university can better respond to the challenges of the students. But I would like for the contributions, I don't want to stream it, but I would like for the contributions to focus on us strengthening this particular document. And if this particular document needs to then include the challenges that has been raised, and the challenges have been raised by Paulette, of course, then of course it must be in there. Now, am I hearing the colleagues then correctly to say that the embedding Mandela document should include the various challenges that students face in the context of how it's been framed here? Then of course we'll take that further, and that will be noted. In the context, I don't know what happened to Vuyani now. Vuyani's questions with regard to troubling, and I want colleagues to sense the kind of what one can say, a culture of how we discuss and debate with one another. I don't want anybody, I don't want a single person to be muzzled in any kind of way. Okay, it doesn't matter what points needs to be raised, and whether you can leave and take your call. No worries at all. So the question about a troubling Mandela that you've raised, if you have listened to the panel now, it's like a deep trouble of Mandela. Né? At the one end, almost like a total rejection and dismissal. At the other end, a formulation of how we can refigure Mandela historically to have a usable way in which it can be deployed in our current situation. And that's precisely what a university should be. It should have those, different debates on the spectrum as well. So Vianney, I was actually just waiting for you so that we can engage with the question that you've raised. The idea of troubling the university and the dichotomies, there is scholarship on the question of, what kind of middle spaces between, oppressor, oppressed, victim, perpetrator, beneficiary, bystander, how that can figure itself out. And I do think that we all have, not equal, but we have a shared complicity for our own history, because the categories of victim perpetrators, the category of bystanders, and all those categories, some people carry that in one particular person at any given time, given any particular kind of context as well. And that's been proven across our history. So I agree with you that one has to trouble those dichotomies and find other kinds of ways. But in the process of troubling those dichotomies, not to undermine the real historical trauma that has been visited upon, oppressed communities, especially those indigenous and black African communities as well across the globe. So there's something that we can figure out there. But I hear what you're trying to say. You're trying to gesture towards a kind of a future that makes it possible for us to imagine a different world in which we live outside of those dichotomies. And that will, of course, be a huge task, as the colleague has also said here. We just give to Vernia as well, and then we can take another round of questions. If people can refer to the embedding document, that would be fantastic, and great colleagues as well, just to see how we can strengthen, because the document will become a guideline for us on to how to engage with Mandela. So the challenges of students that have been raised here is one such example of strengthening the document, if that is not yet firmly and clearly articulated in the existing version that we have.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear from the floor. In that document, there is a whole section on transforming the university, decolonizing the university. And if you feel there needs to be more detail, because it's drafted in a much higher level, analytical way, looking at the university, not Nelson Mandela University necessarily. But I think it's very closely connected to what Vuyani was raising there. For me, it's a challenge for all of us. What you're naming there, Vuyani, is what Bell Hooks calls Western dualism, and we have to find a way of liberating ourselves from that way of seeing the world. And it's a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge I put to Joel, not on the stage, but the extent to which, as Joel is challenging that dualism, he's using binaries. And we all tend to do this because of the extent to which the imprint of colonialism we all carry in our heads. And it's a challenge for all of us, and especially for this university, I would say. But let's take another round of inputs. I think... Yo.
Oh, there's a couple of questions. Go to Irma there. Oh, there's a beautiful... Let's have this debate.
Morning, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity to engage. It was such a stimulating conversation, and I think it's going to need time to let it settle and to really think about what can emerge from that. For me, one of the issues that came to the fore is this old and still very relevant question of who is the nation? And so it's the national question, as us older people refer to it. And then I think that connects really well with Fanon, who wrote about the pitfalls of national consciousness. And I think that this question of the nation, and I would like to see that there's some engagement with Neville Alexander's thinking, in One Azania, One Nation, and he wrote this under the pseudonym of Nosizwe, and that has always been really interesting to me, that he chose a woman's name to be his pseudonym, to say, I'm Nosizwe, and that he embodied in that name the notion of us as a nation, but also had that other little slant. And so I think that in the process of national liberation struggles across Africa and the nationalisms that emerged and are emerging, if we just look at what is happening in the Western Sahel and in other parts of Africa at the moment, and if we take on board the comments earlier about the shift to the right, and I would like to say sort of emergence of global fascisms, that the national question is an absolutely important and critical issue for us to explore and discuss, and nationalisms and their shortcomings in particular. And then for me, that also connects with much early history of Africa, of mass migration, of us being connected as Africans in our early history, and of the ways in which we have been so divided as a result of racial capitalism and colonialism. So I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
So I wanted to make two contributions. I'll start off with I don't want to categorize them as more or less important, but page 11 of the Embedding Mandela document, I don't know the exact, you'll see the bullet points there. It speaks a lot about how there's many issues of how the sciences are more elevated over the social sciences or the humanities, et cetera, right? And I think it's important that we do recognize and work to rectify this, right? But I don't think that it's the only issue within the university of this hierarchical imbalance, right? So we see this within the education realm, but we also see it within the co-curricular aspect as well, right? How sports are more valued in the university over other extracurriculars, right? Like our culture, for example. And then even narrower within that is within the different cultural aspects, how there's still a hierarchy within them, right? So for example, within like the society spaces, right? Oftentimes you'll see the religious societies are favored more than the other activity-based societies, right? So I think it's important that through the document, right? Because I think we're trying to aspire towards equity and equitable within the institution, that we address these inequalities that are prevalent, right? And then secondly, right, at page 19, it's about leadership, right? And then I want to draw this into how our discussion started on this side of the room, right? Oftentimes, I think that this entire thing, right, this entire Indaba, Mandela Indaba, right? It's a very admirable and noble quest in what you're doing. But I think it's very important to note that oftentimes it seems as if bureaucracy will be what is standing in the way of fully implementing and embodying it, right? So we have this wanting or this need to become Mandela in our progress, right? In all his shapes and forms and transformativeness, right? But we see this through the challenges posed by the house, right? So through the hunger that the students face, through the funding issues for postgrad students, right? How every year, at the start of the year, students are sleeping on the floor of main building because they have nowhere to go. These are institutional issues that we face every year, every semester, time and time again. It's not like the university doesn't know that it's going to happen. It's somewhat of an expectation that the semester or the year is going to start 1 week behind because they are going to be fighting these issues, right? And so I think we need to embed in the document how we need to integrate it within our systems, right? Like, we need to not have a challenge to fight for these things. It should be a given that these things are needed, if that makes sense.
Greetings, everybody. My name is. Hello? I did. Yeah, Ted? Okay, so greetings. My name is Malwande Mazingisa, and I'm the SRC Deputy President for 2025 NMU. I've been listening from the side of maybe of the panelists, the floor. There were so many insightful engagements, but there are troublesome inputs that I've been picking up on my notes here. The question of must we still maybe focus on Mandela, must focus on off and on the present day. Why don't we just leave? You see such things. And also listening to a question of we must not raise the issues of butter and bread, yet we are present here, we are living, and those are our current living conditions. I think it's also troublesome to say that we must just see them in the near future, yet we are living with such realities currently. But to come back, Ufanon, there is a very popular quote of Ufanon where he says that each generation has a mission. It's either they betray it or they fulfill it. So I believe that we ourselves, we do have a mission, but obvious, we must draw from the scope, or we must draw from the past revolution, or we must make our own legacy. But we must take, we must refer. I don't know, I'm lacking a proper word of coping what has been done and contrast it with the current the material conditions. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. No. Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. I just want to make two inputs. My name is Mongenkosi Shongwe. Firstly, Comrade CEO, we disagree. Fundamentally with the input that we must totally, get rid of, those that contributed historically. Marx makes a very important, intervention to say that we must not seek to mimic history, but we must borrow from history what is useful to what we're experiencing today, model it around our realities, and take the struggle forward. So that must be the approach in relation to historical events, historical figures, historical, philosophies. We must take what is useful in relation to what is obtaining today. So the idea that we must throw it away altogether, I don't think that it's sustainable. The reason I make this input is because what is happening today is as a result of things that have happened historically. And in order to understand it and trace it properly, you must take that historical view of realities, because we did not just arrive at where we are today. There are many historical events that happened. There are things that happened yesterday that shaped what happened today. So we must always reflect, in terms of history. The last point that I want to make, Prof. Kit, in relation to the document. Yesterday, when we were interacting with the panels, we made an input in relation to the intervention and the scholarship of Ngukiwa Tiongo, particularly on decolonizing the mind. And the central thesis of that document is to say that, the question of language in relation to decolonization, of which I think it's not reflecting on the document, particularly African languages. Because you would know that historically part of what colonialism did was to demonize African languages, as a way of colonizing, as a way of, enforcing colonization. So Nguki makes that point that as part of the program of decolonization, we must, locate the role of African languages. So I want to, I think it's something that you must consider, Prof, to say how do we then locate African languages in articulating a decolonial, project that is consistent with some of the work that we do in relation to Mandela. Of course, Nguki makes this point that language is not just a question of communication, but it embodies the histories, the knowledges, the political and economic systems, values and principles of a particular people. So when you deny a person, you know, a space to articulate and live in their languages, you are denying their being. So I do not think that we can speak about decolonization without centering the question of African languages, because that would be to deny, African people their being, and across African people, everyone, prof, not in a narrow sense. For example, in South Africa, we have about 11, official languages. So I think it's something that we must consider. As I conclude, part of the challenges of education in South Africa is the question of language. There's been debate about really can students do better in mathematics and science if such is represented in the language, that they speak at home and all those things. Of course, that is just a small aspect of it, but I think it's something that must reflect in the document and also in our work in as far as decolonization is concerned. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you. Okay, all right. When I engaged with the document, I engaged from a perspective of the business school. Our business school, Nelson Mandela University Business School. Excuse me. So we're teaching MBAs and Masters of Business Administration students how to take strategy from a vision perspective and operationalize it so that we could have KPIs, targets, so there can be measurement of how this vision is operationalized, because research will tell you that for organizations across the world, strategy falls flat at the point of implementation. 80% of strategies fall flat with implementation. So when I read the document, that was my viewpoint. I was coming from that business school perspective. So Chair, Prof. Kiet, it's an exceptional document, philosophical foundations, brilliant document. However, the gap that I see from a business school perspective, not from sociology and those deep thinking perspectives, is it does not yet articulate an implementation roadmap with time frames, responsibility, who is responsible of doing what. In other words, the responsibility assignment matrix, I don't see that. And of course, the performance indicators. It also lacks specific justice metrics that allows the university to track progress and hold itself accountable. Because if we don't say 3 years from now, this is the target, we will never know where we have moved. In other words, this conversation could have happened in 2017, 2025, and we still wouldn't know, have the dial moved. We wouldn't know because there's no tracking. And the latest things that organizations, including us as an organization, the university, organizations lately are measuring impact. So in order for you to measure the impact, you should have a tracking system. And obviously that tracking system would then go from the targets that you have put. Then of course, the document itself presents transformation concepts like Mandela Compass, epistemic fusion, decentering, but again, without that practical operationalization mechanism. I can make an example, which I did here, to say, for example, in terms of curriculum, you could say an example of a KPI, you could say, what is the percentage of modules, right? Because we're wanting to build graduate attributes. People who cross the stage must have this Mandela in us. We should have taught them, right? So you could say what percentage of modules with African epistemologies and justice framing by the year, let's say 2028, which is a 3-year plan. For example, that's something that I can see. In terms of research, you could say, what number of interdisciplinary justice-orientated research outputs have we had between now that we are having it as a discussion vision into operationalization, let's say by the students who graduate 3 years from now? In terms of leadership, you could have a KPI that says the number of graduates who are graduating with, let's say, in the business school, we've got a module called African Leadership, where we invite Stone Sizani and them to come and speak to our MBA students. And we say, okay, Stone Sizani and many other leaders here, Mcebisi, Jonas, and all of that, we've invited them, and they spoke to our students, and then our students can then say, this was the impact that they had. Tembonkosi as well from the Competition Commission. And then, of course, in terms of engagement, you need to co-create those projects with the community around you. And we are saying that, I mean, how will that look like? So I'm saying that in terms of a philosophical document, it's very beautiful. But then from a business perspective, we are saying, how do you turn the philosophy into measurable actions? Thank you.
Is that fine?
And Dorrington, the one behind you, was your hand still up? No. Oh, you were supporting Dorrington? Yes. This way. I've got it.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I asked to sit down because for the practicality of it, I've got notes in both of my hands. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to page 7 of the document, which clearly describes how to figure out justice. Because I feel like, I know Mr. Vianney said these are binaries, but being a scholar of engineering, I don't think in binaries, I think in polarities. That would suggest that these things are interacting. One is attracting the other. So it says in the document, it could be tempting for NMU to take the position that in the South African context, the Just Society of Mandela's dreams is precisely the one defined by the country's constitution. However, this would condemn the university to be stuck in a particular historical moment. I'm going to stop there. So, colleagues have dished out various ideas of where they feel there's injustice, but this document clearly spells it out in page 7. So what I want to say is the speakers from the previous panel, they wanted to understand slavery as a commerce, right? Capitalism is a commerce, but now slavery disappeared and then that was replaced by capitalism, right? Okay, so now what I want to ask, or Prof. Kit, is when we figure out justice as an institution, should we not be careful to not resuscitate the tenets or the principles or beliefs of orthodox colonialism? By resuscitating them is by trying to be aware. I feel like this is more of an awareness issue because so much has happened, and Mr. Vianney was saying that there's so much happening in between, and there's the polarity of the colonizer being a like charge, and then there's the other polarity of the one who was being colonized, which is the unlike charge. But now there's interaction between these two polarities. So in between all of that, I feel like awareness is needed so that we do not resuscitate the tenets or the beliefs of orthodox colonialism. Now I say orthodox because the panelists presented the idea of neo-colonialism, which would also mean that it embeds parts of the old. But in this case, we call it capitalism. So the institution, when they model their model of justice, I feel like it should be aware of not resuscitating these tenets of colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask, we have a problem of people or students over relying on AI in terms of assignments. Others are lazy to even write cover letters for instant gratification, which proves Bantu Stephen Biko's famous quote. I know we are talking about Nelson Mandela, but it's not like two legends can coexist. The famous Stephen Biko is the most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. How can we fix that?
Jenny then last, and then we try and pull things. Jenny, you wanted to say something? No, we are covered then. Follow the facilitators in.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm still stuck in facilitation mode. What were you saying, Andre? Facilitator, facilitators. So I think my comment is somewhat in response to the matters raised around the institutional issues that are still very prevalent in the university and affect, for example, student hunger, accommodation, matters like that. I think I would like to note that it's not simply an institutional issue in that it's not just a university issue, it's a social issue, it's a government issue, and all these things kind of layer on top of each other to put a huge amount of pressure on the university, which is not to say that we should not do better, but to say that navigating the complexities of this state structure and the societal structure require a lot of work, a lot of effort. And I think Mandela, as he becomes a statesman, and in the early 1990s, is a good example of someone trying to navigate a situation, a really complex situation in which there are often no good choices, but you kind of have to make a choice. But what I want to actually focus on is the aspect of Mandela approach to leadership development in the document. And I found it very interesting to read because it speaks about this. I believe when the NMF did some kind of study and tried to figure out, based on Mandela, what would be like the leadership characteristics that he embodied. So I was trying to, like, in a nutshell, what were these attributes? In line with a particular view of leadership, you can almost like break it down and then disseminate it. And now you can just like create leaders. And what's interesting in reading about the failure of that attempt, there are things that are spoken to here about the way in which Mandela instead embraced complexity, the way he responded to the moment in which he was in. And I think those are very important points. But I also think that there's the question of specificity. So one thing that stood out to me here about Mandela is that Mandela, as a person, brought all the aspects of himself into all these situations. So he could draw on a lot of different aspects. Vern always talks about him being grounded in a kind of discipline. And I think this is very important because I feel like sometimes in these kind of discussions around leadership, we tend towards the generic. And we talk about the issues at a high kind of level, kind of polemical, rhetorical level. And many of us don't think through actually what the material reality of the systems are that result in things like student hunger at the beginning of the year. And I think that an incredibly important issue in a modern bureaucratic state that is so entrenched in like a system of injustice is we have to be willing to learn those systems, because even if you can, say, abolish the system completely, in this particular society, you need something, some kind of system that does work, which is not necessarily, making systems work is not necessarily a radical act, it's not necessarily changing everything, but I do think it is an important thing. And I think Mandela seems to me to embody this kind of like attention to detail and willingness to figure out strategically how to move in the system, even if it's not going to take us to utopia, at least takes us forward into something new. So these are kind of just my thoughts. It's that sense to me of, and I think that's why having a philosophical document is in a way important, or a document like this. Not saying, agree, implementation is really important, but I think focusing on things like KPAs can also take us away from like the heart of things. That can be a good tool, but if you don't have a philosophical underpinning of like,
who do we want to be and how are we going to approach the situations we are in, no matter how difficult they are. That I think if you don't have that, I don't know if it's philosophical, existential underpinning, you're probably not going to get very far. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you. I will hand over now.
Your hands still up? Yes. Okay, right. This is the last question for now, and then we'll take it further. Thank you, Sina.
Thank you. This is going to be less of a question and more of a commentary on centricism and decentering and how big technology is allowing centricism to take place again, especially when it comes to American centricism. A key specific example I would like to bring up is your ride-sharing apps like Uber and Bolt and stuff like that, who has been known to basically take over a certain region's market share by using their capital to price gouge to undercut all the other competition until the other competition is unable to run their business sustainably in that region, having to close down, leaving Uber or Bolt or whatever party basically having a majority stake in that region. I would like to link that back to, I think would it be correct to call it neo-colonialism, because due to the resource extraction that is taking place, the wealth being moved out of the local region to the American tech companies, and how, for example, what used to be taxi cabs would have their own service running. They'll be local operators. The customers would pay the local operators, and that money will stay in circulation in the country. Whereas with the rideshare companies, only a portion stays in the local economy, where most of it gets returned to the tech company controlling the system. And then I would also like to comment about how the technology companies can also influence cultural aspects due to their technology platforms being the main platforms and having such a that's the word I'm looking for, basically being the main platform in their market and having the capital to be able to prevent any incumbents into the market, allowing them to have quite a large reach in the cultural aspect as well. That's all. Thank you very much.
You know, it's I must say, you know, I can literally stay for an entire day like this, listening to these thoughtful comments. You know, I've got so many notes here. And the other thing, of course, just to make a note as well as that, especially for those who are organized readers and engagers with documentation, and I see a lot of them here in this room, if you also want to make a written submission into the document with your track changes, please feel free and to assist us in having an inclusive formulation of the work. And that, Erna, that also, is an invitation to yourself as well. I know that you have a sharp thinking hat when it comes to these things. I also know some of the colleagues here in the middle and the colleagues on that side as well. So that you also, even in a textual way, contribute to the document. It will assist us in getting somewhere with regard to the question that you raised, about who is the nation, how do we frame it, and not only for the document, but also for how critical Mandela studies itself as a field may play itself out. And there, of course, Neville's work will be inescapable, just by the things that he has put on the table. There, of course, and this is the one thing that I always say to the colleagues, if you do want to engage the question of revolution through a Fanonian lens, one has to read the oeuvre, and especially how Fanon was so cautious about new forms of nationalisms, that will undercut, African liberations, and you can see that clearly plays itself out in the current moment. How, because you could already see at that time, some of the patterns emerging as well. I suspect that he would have also foreseen the rise of what you would call global fascisms, because we are in a difficult time now in the world, and that's where the idea of Mandela Critical Studies project, because if I heard Joel and Victoria and David correctly this morning as well, as that is actually a study field that can engage with those deep questions as well. Science and humanities, you are dead right, so we're going to ask you to frame something for us there, Diane, on the inequity in discourse. That's more or less what you are saying, that there's an inequity in discourse around the different knowledge fields, the different codes between culture and sports and so on. Very, very important issues. Because sometimes culturally we preface certain things without even knowing those, and then we undercut those. So I would really like for you to take up that particular challenge, that we can engage with it. I also think that the assessment that, when one tries to do work, that you push, against the bureaucracy, that goes in a different direction. That's more or less the point that come out in terms of our students struggle to find some form of relief, with material injustices that comes up from time to time within the university space. But, and then I jump to Jenny. But it is true that if you want to tackle those bureaucracies, you will have to know how it functions. Just arguing from the left and the right side and whatever in all kinds of big terms, it's not going to work. We have too many critiques of the new liberal university without somebody telling us how do we contribute in our daily practice to the production of the new liberal university. It is always something at a distance from us, whilst the bureaucracy and the structures that we are referring to are actually in part produced also by us. They're not totally objective. They are also partly subjective as well. And the reason for that analysis is so that we can know what to change about our own professional and work behaviors, to work against a system. But because there's something easy about broad strokes of critique. I'm quite sure it probably makes the author feel a bit better, but it doesn't add to what one would regard as an alternative to what is it that we do now as well. Like, for instance, we also have to fight against the way in which, managerialist discourses impacts on the way in which the universities work in the spaces, okay? So that's more or less the notion that comes out of the question about democracy there as well. So, the question of African languages, Momanti, so there I think that we would require like a framing of 1 or 2 paragraphs for the document on that, as to how we can, because you are quite correct in terms of the importance and what is carried within a language, okay? Both cultures, worldviews, all kinds of material formulations in that as well. So that is taken as a contribution to this document, especially from the angle of the decolonization project. Dorrington, I think you are way ahead of where we still need to go to. I think that we first have to have this particular debate of what is it that we should measure. We are not even there yet. So we have to grasp this thing by the contributions that have been made by the colleagues here, and then of course take it further in that particular area as well. And then so the question around that was raised with regard to justice and its framing, there again, of course, it will be great if people can add, and Jenny maybe towards the end, can set I think there is an email to which comments can be submitted. That would be fantastic. But the point around an awareness of history, which is at the heart of your contribution, is certainly taken. So yeah, again, critical Mandela studies must be a Mandela studies that has a keen eye on the awareness of historical developments, over a period of time. I must say, the one on artificial intelligence, it made my mind goes in so many directions around the question of Biko and then the mind. So what I hear you say is that we have now handed over our minds to artificial intelligence. And so we are working totally against the Biconian project. So the new oppressor is AI. It's a very plausible suggestion. It's something to think about. But where you have pushed us to think through is that if we think about embedding Mandela, then the Mandela embedding document should also include something on Mandela and technology. The Mandela figure in the context of these massive technological developments and what that may mean. Now, one can clearly see, of course, that in your context, the idea of an ethical AI, approach can be something that we then should focus on. I have already referred to the way in which Jenny tried to bring in the complexities of Mandela and the kind of non-anachronistic reading that one, like you have to place an historical figure in the context, okay? And then, of course, analyze it from those particular points of view. And one of the reasons in which one can take Joel's arguments further is precisely that even in that context, we have had, of course, various kinds of political formations that already put forward that this may not be a particular ideal situation or outcome for South Africa. And those contestations are just part of how our lives evolved here as well. Then I like the input around American centrism. So the broad idea here is that, and I do think that somewhere in the document, so if you can perhaps just read carefully there, we do speak about decentering, eh? Yeah, okay, so that decentering will then include a decentering of dominant formulations of how new types of economies play themselves out in the South African space, which you can clearly describe as new colonial as well. So then I tie your point around technology and culture back to the point on AI as well, because I do think, and this is for university student leadership, I think that we have not yet even started analyzing the cultural impact of digital technological developments. The way that it reconfigures the very element of what it means to be human and what it means to have different types of relationships. So there is a big chunk of work that I think that you are trying to throw at, for a Mandela studies. Of course, there are, in our university itself, there are some great colleagues trying to study this particular kind of interface between technology and cultural developments, or technology and shifts in cultural developments, and those are clearly, already observable. And I'm not so sure whether in the 2019 colloquium we had, I can't recall, whether we had a thematic area that emerged on Mandela and technologies. No. So this will be a great contribution in that particular context as well. Ne? Yeah, that as well, yeah? Okay. So they're part of the representational truths that shapes how we engage with the world. Eh? So colleagues, so there we are. Jenny, can I check with you? Are we now into the phase of sense making, or do you think we still have some time for? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, right, so, okay, right, 10 more minutes, and then we move, shift into another gear. Okay, colleagues, any more questions? Paulette, if you can focus on the document, do you have it there with you?
That have been made. But it's not directly on the document, so if you don't want that, that's fine.
No.
It's fine. It's okay.
I just thought that you, no, please, let me not muzzle you. And then we have two comments this side as well. Please, Paulette.
Okay, I hope I will be coherent enough. I'm just responding to some of the things. Thinking about, I agree, we have to see how systems work and take Jenny's points and other points that have been made. And of course the bureaucracy and pushing back against managerialism and et cetera. I think my observations of this institution, I find it's quite an interesting one, because on the one hand, and I'm comparing it to two other universities that I've been at previously, which are kind of at opposite ends of the kind of spectrum, if you want to say, the hierarchy in terms of kind of power and privilege of South African universities. I've been at Rhodes University and I've been at the University of Zululand. And I would imagine Nelson Mandela University kind of fits somewhere in the middle. A friend of mine said Rhodes is a boutique university, who was also used to work there. But my observations here is that on the one hand, we have a very kind of wonderful, kind of quite progressive agenda embodied in this kind of occasion that that we're participating in now, and a wonderful name, and you know that we sort of trying to understand and explore and embodying visions about justice and the things that we should be doing. On the other hand, it almost, and that's I think in some ways the kind of dominant institutional ethos, which is great. And even with all the problems, I also see it does work in a positive way in certain respects. I mean, with all the issues, I can see that there is often successful dialogue and that there are often attempts made by the university, for instance, compared to some other institutional spaces. You know, things are often quite relatively positive here in terms of, say, how protests and conflict and things on campus are dealt with. I'm not saying it's great, I'm just saying, you know, compared to what I've seen elsewhere, it's pretty good. But on the other hand, it's almost like we have this, the other side of it, I would say, is the institutional, almost the kind of institutional sort of part of that kind of global, broader kind of capitalist and you know, the kind of bureaucratic thinking, and sometimes even more extreme than that. But I think that what we also have is we have a particularly strong bureaucracy here. And in many ways, an administration-driven system, it seems to me. Because just examples like there are many decisions that are made without recourse to faculty or student governance. There are things that we just hear about at faculty board meetings that are never discussed, they are implemented. And some of those decisions actually have bearing on the academic project. So it's quite hard to understand how the system works because it's very opaque. So it feels as if we have perhaps a little bit of a contradiction, that we have on the one hand a lot of progressive impulses that we're trying to explore and embody and take forward, but on the other hand we have this kind of very opaque bureaucratic institutional structure that is you know, that we've got to push back against without fully understanding. And I also think that, coming to the other point made, Prof, like with respect, and I agree that we need to think about implementing things, but I also think we need to be careful of certain methodologies. There's certain things we can't just take for granted that everything can be measured, or that they're not ideological implications of adopting certain kinds of forms of measurement under managerialism. Because I think that these sort of right-wing systems are operating in those ways. So, and maybe there's also some deep thinking needed in places like the business school. How do we reconcile the image of justice with an obviously, by definition, pro-capitalist kind of, project in terms of the business school? I don't know. But, because I think there's a little bit of a contradiction between saying we're all about implementation, we're not deep. We're not deep philosophical, we're about practical implementation. What are you implementing? And how are you assuming that certain things can be measured, and how? And what does that mean for everyone else? That's all. Thank you. Sorry.
My understanding through the phase Making Trouble with Mandela might implement the challenges around Mandela's impact on social justice. But how can one be promoting social justice and equality if you're being told that NSS doesn't actually sustain you to further your studies? So we had a lecture telling us that. Meanwhile, you know that not everyone is privileged to get proper funding. We have been having these problems of funding and all that. Sometimes I feel like we're fighting a battle that is not our own. These problems have been there ages ago. But now I'm thinking, why does everyone have to eat from the cake? My ideology of eating from the cake is that you get a full cake, and if you have to have about 10 people and just slice equally and give it to 10 people, everyone is happy. But now people are getting the cake and they're eating for themselves. So now everyone is not happy. So why can't the universities try to find all the sponsors, the fundraising, all that will actually help students to get all the opportunities to actually sustain and continue with proper studies? Thank you.
I was also counting myself. Yes, sorry. I was also counting myself. Maybe in just regards to what we can add to the document, I think the theme of peace and reconciliation, Zama and I were just talking about the note that is on the bench sculpture by the library. Nelson Mandela's life is attributed to peace and reconciliation, and what some of us would then look at as selling out and da-da-da-da, but that's not where I'm going. But maybe if we were to try and compare the peace and reconciliation and relate it to the issue of violence surrounding our university and the society at large, I think that discussing reconciliation and peace in relation to the violence, how are we using his values to make trouble in that regard, instead of just like wallowing over it? Because I think the violence part of it is what makes us get into the cracks of the matter. I think Mrs. Victoria spoke about the pervasive surveillance on the marriage of Utata, and Zama yesterday spoke about how there's a letter that he was writing to his granddaughter. I think looking at the peace and the reconciliation and getting into the personal is going to help us at least arrive at solutions at how, as a university, we're spearheading policy reform and policy implementation in relation to violence, sexual harassment, and discrimination, using those values of peace and reconciliation. Thank you, Prof.
Okay. So my additional comment has to do with standpoint. So I think Mandela stood for certain things. He said, "I'm prepared to die for certain things." And what I think is really important in that for us in our discussion, whether we agree with some of the things that he stood for and that he advocated, is not the issue, but that he stood, which means that he had a position. He had an idea of what he thought was appropriate in a particular historical period. So if we take this idea of standpoint, then I think that we've got to do a bit more troubling with the notion of academic expression. The explanation in the current document is very much the kind of expression of academic neutrality. And my argument, and I hope there are other people who share that point of view, is that academics and their writing, whether it's science writing or whether it is writing from the humanities, is not neutral. It stands for something. And so I think we need to maybe put in the idea of scholar activism, and how we embody that within our university. What is it that we, and I don't think there should be a single thing that we stand for, other than the need to be able to accept that people take a stand on issues. And then for me, that taking a stand means that you stand in solidarity with something. And I think of solidarity as a system. Solidarity is the system by which people have survived exploitation and oppression. Solidarity is the system from which people extend the possibility of life to one another. It's also maybe the system from which we can deal with the new liberal university. It's a starting place for a counter-imagination of a university. And so I would just like us to maybe think and talk about those ideas, standpoint, what we actually mean by academic expression as opposed to scholar activism, and the notion of solidarity. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, we're going to move now to close. Now, Vianney, if I give you the question, then I have to give the 10 hands that came up here. I'm just joking. Give to Vianney. The two more, and then we move towards close. Sina, to Vianney, and then to. You see there now. Okay, please. Sorry, man. I didn't see that, Azile.
Good afternoon. My name is Simpiwe. I'm not from here at the university, but I am here. Yeah, Simpiwe. So, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Yeah. I just wanted to make a contribution here, Ubuntu. You know, when this started in 2017, when the university was trying to rebrand itself and under Nelson Mandela, from Nelson Mandela Metropolitan, I had a question that time because I attended the event which was in Best Street. But then I asked, like, how could the university help the Nelson Mandela municipality? Because I could see that many years it was going down, whereas it carried the name. And yesterday I wasn't here in person, but I did attend online. I hear different speakers speak, including Dr. Vuyani and that other lady from the Mandela and Rhodes, including Professor Harris. Now I saw it like this, that maybe the Nelson Mandela municipality was supposed maybe to be invited. Like this is what I think, because I see it like this. It's a Nelson Mandela University in Nelson Mandela Bay. In Nelson Mandela Museum, which is the Eastern Cape, in Nelson Mandela Foundation, which is nationally, and Mandela Rhodes, which is international. So I'm asking myself maybe, what could then the university do to help or to contribute to the municipality? Because I just feel that maybe the university, maybe it's me, maybe I'm wrong. I just feel when I'm sitting down and feel that maybe the reason that it cannot call the municipality to come and contribute on its own process of the rename, because I think it was 2012 when the Port Elizabeth or the Dispatch were fused together and were named Nelson Mandela. And that was a whole lot of thing. Why did they choose that name? So I felt that in a way they have a contribution to make, but there is not that opportunity. But then maybe I thought that maybe I would probably even read the quote on this document here, as Mandela says. He says, in Africa, we have a concept known as Ubuntu, based upon the recognition that we are only people because of other people. You know, based on that, I felt that maybe I need to probably maybe to get this word to the university and maybe ask them to say that, okay, please recognize yourself as the Mandela or name on Mandela institutions. But remember, you are in Nelson Mandela Bay, and most of the students are scattered around in accommodation in the Nelson Mandela Bay area. So basically that was one thing. The other one, which is the last one, was the one of the integrity. You know, I remember one quote in the Bible, yeah, because I do follow that. It's there. It says, it reads like, it says other thing, but then it comes to this point that it says, the other thing, you have the name, but you are dead. And like I was thinking, hey, maybe that's another thing that maybe the university needs to look at, including the Nelson Mandela Museum and the Nelson and all that, because in my own observation, but it may not be the time here to say that, but it's one thing to have the name, but it's another thing that you are dead. So I just wanted to make them to look at that. Thank you very much.
It's one thing to have the name.
No, I'm saying that it's one thing to have a name, but it's another thing that when you are dead. Thank you very much.
Really? And then Azila, that side, huh?
Thank you. Thank you. I will be short. Now, I'm trying to check where are you locating the role of the state in this project? Because I'm thinking about the state as an enabler of this project, or the state as a destructive agent, you know, of this project. And I'm raising that when I'm saying that as an enabler, because I've been listening to students saying that we go to the classroom hungry and we don't get NSFAS. Is it NSFAS? Yes. We don't get NSFAS and all that. And my understanding is that it is not the university that provides that. It is the state. And most of the time you find the state that is outsourcing its own problems to the universities by not giving the students what they deserve. And then you would have students saying that you can't advocate a project of this nature under the name Nelson Mandela when we are still hungry, when we don't have money, when we don't have accommodation. And who's responsible for that? You are not responsible for that. The state is responsible for that. So that is why I'm saying, where are we locating the role of the state to ensure that a program of this nature, a project of this nature, is a success? And another thing which is so important, we need to, you were talking about the sociology of violence yesterday? Yes. I'm also thinking that it is... I'm protected. So, Prof, remember that there was this argument about sociology of violence. This violence, most of the time, it is caused by the policies of the state. This violence, most of the time, it is caused by the environment where we find ourselves in. And the person who is more responsible to ensure that this violence is eradicated, which is further migrated to these university spaces, it is the state. So The state is violent towards its own subjects. And indirectly, we are having, within these spaces called university, we are having another violence. So I don't know, it is very much important because these are the disturbing factors if we want this project to be successful or not. Thank you.
Very, very short. Good day, everyone. Tabiso Kumete Saimi, South African International Maritime Institute. We are in Nelson Mandela University, soon to be Mandela University. And this is the Ocean Science Campus, the first of its kind in the country. And on page 27, I was very interested to see anything ocean-related mentioned, which is something we don't really see in our country. It's quote here, our future as human being depends on our intelligence and product use of the ocean, and that in turn will depend on determining effects of dedicated women and men from all parts of our planets. So a fifth session of the Independent World Commission of the Ocean in Cape Town, South Africa on the 11th of November 1997. So what brought my interest is I'm in the maritime space, aspiring seafarer myself. We are Saimi, we market, we make our way of the maritime space in the country. But what we've noticed is that our youth don't really have much information or know much about the ocean space, or maybe are interested in it. So in us trying to build a culture of the maritime space also includes the society as well. And the social aspect of the space is what we don't understand because we are just a product of the industry. So we need help from the socialists. Many of them here have opened my eyes about a lot of things, but I wish we could have a couple of them, just like Madiba, didn't know much about the ocean, but was able to mention it. So if there are part of us here who are willing to read more, dwell more about the maritime economy and aspiring it directly to the society and help us to understand the social ills and how we can solve them using the ocean, because we have the ocean in the east, the south, and the west of our country, and that's money in some countries, and it's another mode of transport for luxury. There's tourism. There's a lot of it. I can go the whole day, but thank you for this session, and I really wish that some of you carry the spirit of Madiba and exploring the ocean space. Thank you very much.
Dabiso, I'm so happy for that contribution as well. If you, because I would have wanted actually to give you a bit of space to just speak about the Saimi and Ocean Sciences work, because I think it's very crucial. And the fact that it's part of our Mandela Strategic Legacy programs in any case. So thanks for that contribution. So you're a seafarer. Yeah, you must take us out, my brother. Oh, that's fantastic. So colleagues, I'm going to try, and Prof. Vern will then come in as well, just to pull things together around this. Quickly just to responding, because I want to honor these brilliant, contributions that the colleagues have been making. But of course, my papers are all over the place. I don't use a book or whatever, So, Michaela, can you just put this there for me, and then I can find a better way of engaging with us. All right. So, Sina, the question around peace and reconciliation that you put forward as a particular idea, I must say that the notion of the personal as a formulation of action is a very powerful one, because in my experience, that is always what has driven, true activism. A part of the reason why I've always insisted, and the young people knows it, that works in my space, is that you always have to see your personal responsibility into a particular system configuration, so that it gives you a sense of the possibility of what it is that you can do. Okay, even if you raise these big, massive questions. Okay, and part of the psychology of raising the big, massive questions, in many, many respects, it's sometimes to say to yourself that you can't do anything, and therefore I'm not going to do anything, except for putting these things on WhatsApp and, of course, speaking in broad strokes about it. But if you connect this into the personal, of course, then that is, it gives you like an ethical obligation to put your money where your mouth is, okay? So when I speak, I call on myself, okay? And when I speak, I even call on myself to engage with the different sets of contradictions that institutions are made of, like Paulette said. Paulette, so I can't say it any better. That's the reality. Institutions are contradictory spaces. And to think that you can build consensus around those kinds of things will simply make you just unhappy, you know. So you will have one direction going there, the other direction going on the other way. The other thing that comes out of the 3 contributions, the first 3, was the fact that, you see, how is it possible that at one time you can have a massive decolonial movement that spark massive scholarly work, that reconfigure, to a large extent, the landscape of student experiences in the country? That's the one. And on the other hand, you have a disciplining new liberal institution. The question about an activist institution within a new liberal institution is the truth. So if you think of the university in the multiplicities of its existence, you have your activist spaces, you have your new liberal disciplining spaces, you have your spaces of intimate, you know, engagement with institutions, with your work, with your knowledges, and so on. So one has to think of massive, massive institutions and bureaucracies like contradictory spaces with gaps that allows for different kinds of activist work to happen. And then the task of us is to knit that together so that it makes a much more stronger impression on the dominant form of the university. Once you think of it like that, you literally places a responsibility on yourself in the spaces for which you are responsible for. And I'm not talking about abstracts. The decolonial university is trying to emerge in this very university. That's why we have these discussions. That's why you have this great African scholarship emerging in the spaces. We have some of the biggest IKS conferences last year in this exact same university. You see? And that is a different type of university than the one that has the overall dominant power and discourse within our spaces. Nah? And that is not simply so that you have like a good feeling about it. It is because I think empirically it is true that you have activist spaces in university, you have disciplining spaces in university, and you choose how you fight your battles in that space. When we all come together, we try to push the university collectively in a particular direction, which is the difficult part. But of course, which you then knock together through the notion of solidarity that Erna has expressed, and of course, the idea of standpoint that's also in there that ties together scholar activism. So when Erna's point is that we perhaps in the document also reflect on the notion of scholar activism. Yeah, you know, in that space. Sampiwa, it's nice to see you. Would like to touch base with you after this. Don't run away, please. Gqeberha is a student city, that's for sure. One of our students did a PhD on the studentification of the city, so that work is available, and the university has very, very strong ties to the municipality. We have different kinds of interfaces there, but you would know that just in the context of its own dysfunctionality, how difficult it is to get something meaningful going. And it's not as if we're not trying, because those relationships are still in place as well. Then the last one is the role of the state. Vuyani, of course. That's for sure. Vuyani wanted to check in with us how do we land the role of the state in this particular project, and to look at the state as both an enabler and the state as a perpetrator of the inequalities that it is trying to combat as well. And then Tabiso made the last project as well. Just on reflection, colleagues, I must say that that I'm not going to go through all the notes that have been prepared. Michaela, thank you so much. Yeah, but because we have leave it here. Yeah. So the one would be the multiplicity and the complexity of the Mandela legacy that came through yesterday and this morning so beautifully, and then making good trouble as a guiding principle. The idea of troubling something, i.e. not to let it, simmer in the way that it does. I do think that it's quite strange, in the Africanization, decolonization in Durban, when the scholars came together, the one way in which they envisioned Africanization was through indigenous knowledge systems, almost intuitively. No? And that's also the thematic that came through yesterday as well. So both in philosophical terms, but also in epistemic terms. So you have Ubuntu in the philosophical term, you have IKS in epistemic terms. No? So we have a coordinating structure in the university, and we have beautiful, beautiful young people and lecturers working on AKS. From pharmaceuticals colleagues up to cultural and music, excavations, that we just have to tie together as well. And I do think that perhaps at another stage, when we try to figure out how do we engage, African cosmologies. So Jenny, that may be one of the areas of work, both cosmology and IKS, so that we have a firmer discussion on that as well. And that the university can also present to its own constituency the kind of work that's been happening. And the university's role in society, that came through interconnectedness, between theory and, of course, practice. And then, of course, we had the wonderful work of Zama, from a visual artist perspective. Amazing, Zama. Give Zama a hand, man, Now this morning, I must say, of course, like Vern, I have like 1,000 notes here just on this morning, which it's just so amazing. Né? So it's almost like the rejection of Mandela, and then, of course, now that's where the contradictions are coming from. Né? You can have rejections and love in one and the same space and around one figure as well. So the injunction with regard to, I must say, Joe's reading of white supremacy being morphed into what we now call constitutional democracy was like an insight that will stay with me. That perhaps our constitutional democracy protects certain kinds of things which it was meant to fight against. And then I think the Victoria's point around the importance of black studies, we have to have in South Africa, because we are on the continent of Africa, we have to invest energy and time in black studies, colleagues, okay? Energy and intellectual time in the experiences of black lives, okay? Because I think that so much of the future that we can imagine comes through there. But the nice thing that David put forward was the fact that even if you have foreclosures of these kinds of debate elsewhere in the world, we can still come together with this kind of thing. But the big lesson from David was the fact that even if we try to separate life and figure, that may not be as easy as we think, that life and figure may not be, like Mandela as life, historical, and then Mandela as a social figure, that may not be so easily separated as we think it may be, but that we sit with those tensions. Né? We sit with the tensions that Joel, Victoria, and David shared, with us. And then, of course, in sitting with those tensions, we should be prepared to slip here and there, with all those kinds of, different kinds of challenges that coming through there as well. So within that, and then of course tying into this particular discussion, which became more pragmatic in the sense of, reflecting on the document. So in my own head, what is emerging is like an enrichment of the conceptual frame, Dorrington. So we have had this great discussions yesterday and today, which simply would be great, working it in, to strengthen and expand the sophistication of the Embedding Mandela document. And then, of course, with the kind of suggestions being made by colleagues. And we will notify colleagues about a deadline for written submissions as well. For those who have promised that they will write these powerful paragraphs into the document, we will we will keep you. Yeah, We will check in with you on that, and that will be very, very useful. But I'm always, towards these kinds of, I always feel very touched, and moved by the generosity of our students, touched and moved by the generosity of our staff, and touched and moved by, the work of my own team, in pulling this together. It is not taken for granted, that you have to listen to our voices, for minutes and hours on end, and then of course still being able to engage in such a great way, highly, highly productive. I think that, this document is going to benefit a lot from the discussions that came out of here. So from my side, and this is my last word for today, many, many thanks for the past 2 days, colleagues, and to the team who knocked this together also. Many, many thanks. Vern, to you as well. Many, many thanks. Let me hand over to you now.
Just to say thank you. Thank you from my side as well. One of our visitors, our guests, said to me earlier that sitting here in this space felt like being at a real university as opposed to experiences at other universities. And I think the reference was to the extent to which this university, well, maybe three things, is willing to look in the mirror and confront exactly what it looks like and what needs to be done. But secondly, the ways in which this university creates space for constructive contestation. And I'm reminded of something that Madiba said to us at the Nelson Mandela Foundation years ago when he gave us a mandate to do dialogue work. He said, if you get people in a room and they all agree with one another, that's not a dialogue, that's a chat. And so I was blown away by the panel discussion this morning. Creating space for a voice like Joel's, challenging Mandela directly, and then some of the really challenging inputs in this session as well. I'm very grateful for that. But then also the level of participation. I really didn't believe there'd be more than about 10 or 15 people here for this working session. And to see all of you present and participating, it tells me this is a real university. And that's why I keep coming back. Thanks very much.
Okay, I feel like I'm now being forced to sit down. Okay. No, I have to pose. Anyway, thank you. And thank you to everyone here. My final job is just to do the vote of thanks, which is always, it's always one of those things that in some ways is kind of boring because it's just a list. But as someone who's been involved in the whole preparation of the event, it actually means a lot to me to be able to formally in front of everyone say thank you to all the people who made this possible and who contributed. I'm not going to be able to name everyone by name because I would definitely miss someone or forget someone, and my brain is not functioning at like full capacity right now. So if I say anything weird, that's my excuse. So I'd just like to start by thanking all those who made formal contributions, formal for want of a better word, on the panels, our Vice-Chancellor, our DVCs, the staff members, the students and student leadership, and the people who came from different institutions and different places. I think David Scott is from UCLA? Columbia, from Columbia, thank you. So all these people who came together to share their ideas, their thoughts, their scholarship around this question that we're grappling with about Mandela. And also thank you to those people who made themselves available for the role of facilitation to contribute and guide those discussions. I also want to thank Vern and Andre specifically. Vern for the ongoing connection with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, with the idea of archive, with just all your ideas you have around Mandela and what he might mean to this institution. Thank you for that. And for especially the work this year as interim director, it's been amazing. Yeah, actually. Okay, and to Andre, who has been making space and time and coming up with ideas of things for us to do around the name. Sorry, that's like a inside joke. Thank you. I think the spaces you create are special, and we're very lucky to have them. And I think also mentioned that the Vice Chancellor also is very deliberate about creating spaces where we can have these kinds of discussions. And I think we're very lucky to be in this time and space to have these conversations. What about the hand for me? Okay, and then I think Zama, I wanted to thank you for being so keen and willing to jump in on this work. I think we had this idea, Vern had this idea, and we were like, okay, let's find an artist and see if we can make something happen. And I remember meeting Zama for the first time after we'd proposed this idea, and she'd already started reading, she already had ideas, she was just so excited about the work, and we just knew, like, this is going to be something really cool. So I just want to say thank you for the energy you bring, thank you for the artworks, thank you for all the extra running around you did behind the scenes. They've just been, like, really, really great to work with. It's been amazing, and yeah, we just look forward to seeing what you do next. And then to everyone who contributed from the audience in various ways, everyone, especially everyone who stayed to talk about the Embedding Mandela document. As Vern doesn't seem to understand that people at Nelson Mandela like to engage. He seemed very concerned that we weren't going to get a lot of people in the space at all, and especially for this session. So I'm glad we proved him wrong. So thank you so much. All of your inputs, your energy, just having you here, your presence has been really amazing. And everyone I've gotten to speak to specifically, it's been great. I really hope to see you at future engagements and just around the university as we just build. I suppose it's the old-fashioned idea of collegiality, but those relationships that actually make the university something special. And then broadly thank you to the university for its support across portfolios and faculties. As much as we struggle with bureaucracy and overly complex admin, we do get things done, even if it takes longer than we would like. And I think we need to recognize and thank people, the catering services, the cleaning services, protection services, and maintenance, everyone who makes these things possible. A special thank you to Viwe. I don't know if she's here, but a special thanks to her and everyone who works at Ocean Sciences campus for allowing us to use the space and for being so supportive in that area. We also always have outside support. I think special mention today would be catering, the person who assisted us with the hanging of the artworks and the framing. Yes, thank you, Viwe. We see her. And then to the audiovisual team, thank you so much. You guys are always amazing. I always know I always stress out if I'm at a different institution or in a different place and we don't have our audiovisual team who we know and who's so amazing. Every time I do that, something goes horribly wrong and I just want to cry. So thank you for just always being there on time, running everything as smoothly as is possible within the vagaries of technology. We really appreciate that. And then finally, and this is always the part that makes me emotional, is thank you to the team. In this case, it's the TIMS team, the ETP office team, and the CriSHET team. You guys are amazing. Thank you for always showing up in various ways, in any way that is needed, from setting up chairs. So the setup you're sitting on is a result of our team. From facilitating if you're needed, for presenting if you're needed, for taking notes, for running around, looking for water. All these little things always going on in the background. And it's really amazing to work with people who are willing to do what needs to be done to make something amazing happen. So thank you so much. And I just want to especially thank Nadia Mukadam, who's hiding at the back there. Really hope I don't say this, because she because she was the main administrator on this particular event, for this event. And these big events take a lot. So I just want to say thank you for her and for being such a wonderful and nice person to be around. So we appreciate you and thank you very much. And
To myself, to yourself.
okay, apparently I have to thank myself. Thank you to me. I'm giving myself a week of leave as a gift. And then to end off, before we head off to lunch, which should hopefully be ready, I would love it if we could all just gather at the front. We'd love to have a group photo of everyone who's here right now, that we can then share when we do a report. And to let you guys know, we will share, to everyone who RSVP'd, we will share a link to the video, we will share a link to the photos so that you can find yourself or any photos you want to keep, post on Instagram. Oh, and do follow CriSHET, what? Yeah, okay, so let's end on a shout out to social media. Thank you. Let's gather for a photo. Okay.